Hello whittlers and carvers, and welcome back to the joy of carving. It's a really nice and simple project today. I'm going to guide you through how you can carve this little pine forest. And like many of the other projects available here on the YouTube channel, this is going to be really straightforward and a very minimal amount of tools will be required. All you're going to need for this project is your whittling knife, a piece of driftwood to mount the trees on, and the various basswood blanks that we use to carve the trees, and then also just a small bundle of sticks that we're going to use to carve the trunks of the trees. I'm going to be utilising a technique that carves towards myself today, so I am wearing one of my thumb sheaths. I do recommend you get yourself a thumb sheath or some sort of hand protection if you're using the same technique, but if not, don't worry, I will show you an alternate technique that carves away from yourself. So we're going to begin by taking one of our basswood blanks here, and I've drilled a small hole in the base of the blank. This doesn't go very far in, it's only a centimetre or so, and this is so that we can fit the trunk of the tree into the finished carving itself. If you ordered the kit for this off the website, those holes will already be pre-drilled, so you don't need to worry about this part. And we're going to begin just by rounding all of those sharp edges. Now the thumb sheath, it's not technically necessary here because we're not carving with a whole arm movement. This is literally just a squeeze of our hand. The alternate carving method here is to carve away from yourself. Push your thumb against the back of the blade and just imagine that you're sharpening a pencil. However, I do prefer this method of carving towards myself, just using that thumb sheath for some added protection. I feel as well that this is a much stronger grip to hold that material as you're carving it. If you're going to carve away from yourself, that material may have a tendency to fly out of your hands depending on how strong your grip is, so just bear that in mind if you're using the opposite technique. So we're continuing to round all of those edges, and you can see there as well that I'm rotating that piece of wood as I carve it to ensure that everything is symmetrical and I'm carving evenly as I go. So all we're doing here really is carving a tube. We're taking a rectangular piece of wood and we're just making it into a cylinder. Once the material is rounded, you can start carving the very tip of the tree. And we do this just by removing more and more of the material as we go, so that we're going to end up with a cone shape essentially. But I must stress that the trick to carving these trees is to keep twisting that material in your other hand as you carve it. So if you watch carefully, you'll see that I'm constantly turning that tree as I carve it. This is to ensure that you're going to end up with a nice symmetrical shape at the end. And we're just finishing the shape by carving the very tip of the tree there. Now that we have the finished cone shape of our tree, we're going to add all of the various segments, and we're going to do this by rolling the knife blade along the tree very, very carefully here. And you need a very, very minimal amount of force here. This is merely just to mark out where each of those various segments of the tree are going to be. I just want to stress again, don't use much force here. The last thing that you want to do is use too much force and end up slipping and cutting yourself. So just be very, very careful about how much force you're using here. These lines have not only marked out where the segments of our tree are, but they're also going to provide us with what's called a stop cut. As I whittle the segments of the tree here, you can see that the knife stops automatically in those lines. We don't want the knife to go beyond any of those stop cuts. Each segment of the tree is basically an upside down V shape. That's the shape that we're carving. So we need to leave those segments wider at their base and narrower as they come to the top as they meet the next segment of the tree. As you start to whittle around as well, you're going to get little bits of feathering like I have here, and you remove those segments simply by pressing your knife into the section that you created earlier, into each of those lines, making those lines deeper. And just remember to keep rotating that tree as you carve to ensure that it's symmetrical. And here I'm just giving you an example of how it would look if you were using the alternate method, carving away from yourself. So just remember, this is a slightly weaker grip, and also it's worth mentioning, always be conscious of how close that knife is to your opposite hand. So you can see that the tip of the knife is very close to my left hand there, so always be mindful and careful about the position of the blade when you're carving. When you're finished, you should have something that looks similar to this. And we're going to finish this off just by adding some small details. We're going to carve out some V-sections on each of the segments, just to give the impression that it has branches, that those segments are splintered into different branches and different shapes. And it's really simple to do this. We're just going to use the very tip of the knife, and we're going to carve a V shape at a slight angle, just to remove a small section. And just pick a few random areas. It doesn't need to be in a pattern, it doesn't need to be exact. Try and choose various different sizes, just so that it looks a bit more natural and sort of uneven. And there we have all of those nice little nicks carved into the branches of our tree. And now we need to carve the trunks of our trees. And we're going to do this simply by sharpening one end into a point so that it fits nicely and snug into the hole that we drilled into the base of the blank. We'll fix our trees to the piece of driftwood in exactly the same way using this method, just by drilling a hole into the piece of driftwood and sharpening the end of the stick so that they fit in place. Eventually you're going to end up with a nice little cluster of trees like this. Now you can carve as many or as few as you want. In fact, I'm thinking about doing another project where I'm just going to carve about 40 or 50 or so of these on a much larger branch, just to see how it would look. I think it'd be really interesting to see a whole forest of these as well. And of course you can choose to paint yours as well, like I have here. So I'm just using thinned down water-based acrylic paints. Lastly, I'm just gluing the trees into their final resting place. And that's it, that's the finished project. If you have any questions, feel free to comment on the video. I do try and answer every question that I can. I'd love to see your versions of this as well, so why not tag me on Instagram? You can find a link to that on the homepage of the YouTube channel. Finally, I just want to say a huge thank you for watching the video and supporting the channel. Please like and subscribe, but most of all, happy carvings everyone.